With the coming of night, the fog had descended. A thick, choking blanket covered the city. The sound of footsteps and hooves was smothered, and the light from the street lamps barely reached the pavement. A man stood at the corner of Drury Lane and the Aldwych. He raised a bottle to his lips, then hurriedly concealed it as footsteps approached. Two figures loomed suddenly out of the fog, a man and a woman, huddled together with their heads down. They ignored the man, and he smiled wryly to himself and took another drink. The next moment, he started forward as a strange sound came from close by. He'd never heard a noise like that, and with the confusion of the fog, it sounded haunting and unnerving. What was it? Not a person, nor did it sound like an animal. A sound that went up and down. It seemed to wheeze, then subside, then come on again. The man decided that, whatever it was, he didn't want to be anywhere near it. He stuck his bottle in his pocket and ran. The sound continued, and, dimly, a shape became visible, a tall object with a light glowing on the top of it. The sound ceased, and, after a moment, a door opened in the front of the object, and a woman put her head out.
It's horrible.
Another head appeared, just above the first one.
Oh, definitely London.
Its owner said.
London 1886.
I'll take your word for it,
said the first woman.
And this,
said the second,
is a London particular. Thick fog made worse by coal smoke.
London particular?
Yeah, that's what they used to call it. Very keen on euphemisms in the 19th century. Charlie told me that.
Charlie?
asked the first woman, although she had already guessed who her friend was talking about.
Charlie Dickens. He put it in one of his books. Bleak House, I think. Come on.
She stepped out through the door.
Let's see where we are.
Yaz stepped slowly out of the TARDIS and tried to look around. She coughed again and pulled the shawl she was wearing up around her mouth. When the doctor told her they were going to 19th century London, she had decided to dress accordingly, and her navy blue travelling dress, jacket and neat little hat suited her down to the ground. The shawl was a late addition, and she was glad of it. The doctor looked at her and said,
Nice. Looking good.
The doctor, preferring to stick to trousers, was wearing a suit with a white shirt and an embroidered waistcoat.
I haven't worn this for years,
she said, looking down at the waistcoat.
Still looks pretty good.
Yaz smiled.
It does.
She agreed.
Where are we? I mean, are we in London?
Not sure. The fog is messing up the readings a bit. We'll have to find a street sign or ask someone. Come on.
She vanished into the fog, then returned and held out her hand.
Better hang on to each other. Don't want to get separated.
No,
was all Yaz said, but she took the doctor's hand with relief. The two friends made their way forwards slowly. The doctor held up a sonic screwdriver and they followed the glow of the light. It didn't do much to show their path, but it felt reassuring to have it. They reached a corner and the doctor held up the sonic to light the street sign.
Drury Lane. The West End! We could go to a show. Theatre, opera, ballet, you name it. There's some great performers around here now. Henry Irving, Ellen Terry, Adelina Patti. Bit early for Nellie Melba though.
anywhere out of this would be good.
Yaz replied from inside her shawl. The doctor coughed and said,
Good idea. Let's find somewhere to get a drink. There must be somewhere around here. Let's see.
Yaz didn't reply in case she started coughing again, but she followed the doctor along the pavement. They walked on for about 10 minutes, then came to another corner. The doctor waved her sonic around the corner, but could see little. At that moment, though, a slight breeze stirred the fog and a courtyard became visible. The buildings around the sides were in darkness, save for one.
This looks interesting. Look, a little theatre.
She pulled Yaz with her towards the building. The lower levels were in darkness, but a light glowed in an upstairs window. The doctor stopped in front of the main door and peered through the glass in a window by the door.
I love a little theatre. Much more fun than a huge one.
She stood back, then said,
I wonder what's on.
Nothing. Look at this.
The door of the theatre was closed and secured with a heavy lock and chain. A weather-worn, peeling notice was stuck to the wall close by. The words, in heavy type, read, Theatre closed.
Oh, that's a shame. It looks like such a nice little theatre. Oh well.
She turned away from the door and Yaz followed her, only to turn back when a movement in one of the upper windows caught her eye.
There's someone in there. That light moved. Someone's in there. Look!
The doctor looked and, sure enough, the glow, just visible through the fog, moved to another window, then passed out of sight.
Caretaker, maybe?
Yaz suggested, without much conviction. The fog and the darkness were getting on her nerves, and she felt unexpectedly disturbed by the light.
Probably,
said the doctor, but she stopped and went back to the door and put her ear to it.
No, something's definitely happening in there. Listen!
Yaz joined her at the door. She could just hear the sound of voices from inside the building.
Perhaps it's reopening,
she said.
Maybe. Could be rehearsals.
Yaz looked at the building more closely.
It's really run down. I think they do it up first. The window's broken for starters.
The doctor didn't reply, and Yaz looked at her. She was staring at her Sonic.
What is it?
Asked Yaz.
Well, that's strange.
Murmured the doctor to herself.
Very strange.
What is?
At that moment, she saw a light approaching, a disembodied glow in the fog like a jack-o'-lantern floating above the ground. A man's voice spoke.
What's going on here?
The owner of the voice appeared, a tall figure in a dark uniform and cape with the unmistakable helmet of a London policeman on his head. Yaz nudged the doctor. The policeman came closer, and the light turned out to be a lantern held aloft in his hand. The doctor smiled.
Ah, hello, Constable?
She said, taking a guess at his rank.
We've just arrived. We were just looking at this theatre. It's so interesting. Can you tell us anything about it?
The policeman didn't answer, but he seemed to be considering the question rather than dismissing it. So Yaz put in.
We wondered if it might open again soon.
The policeman lowered his lantern and came closer.
Well, this place, it won't ever be open again. Not from what I've heard. It's been closed for nigh on 200 years.
He looked at his listeners and seemed pleased at their expressions of surprise and interest.
Yeah, closed down in 1685 or so, he said. End of King Charles's reign, the second, that is. He'd sent the Roundheads packing, and the theatres was allowed again, see? This was one of them.
Why did it close?
Asked the doctor.
And why didn't it open again?
Asked Yaz. The policeman leaned forward.
Oh, it's a strange story,
he said, lowering his voice. He looked from the doctor to Yaz.
Mind you, I've only heard it. I don't know the truth of it. But story goes that it's haunted.
Wow!
Said the doctor. If the word was unfamiliar to the policeman, the tone was unmistakable. He smiled in satisfaction at the effect his words had had on his audience.
Yeah,
he said.
Haunted.
What happened?
Asked Yaz.
Well, there was one night. It's around this time of year now, I think of it. The company was all on the stage and the house was full. It was all going well, and then, all of a sudden, this bright light comes shining down on the stage.
Yaz glanced at the doctor. Her eyes were fixed on the policeman's face, and she was listening intently.
It was brighter than the lamps. Well, candles. That's what they'd have had in them days.
The policeman went on.
All the people watching, they couldn't see nothing. But then the light went out, and the stage was empty. All the actors had vanished.
What happened to them?
And Yaz glanced at her again. Her tone suggested that an idea had occurred to her.
Well, they came back,
said the policeman.
The audience was sitting there, all shocked. And then the light came back again, and so did all the actors. And they carried on like as if nothing had happened. Well, they tried to, but the audience, well, it was in that much of a state they couldn't carry on. They had to stop.
And after that?
Asked Yaz.
Well, next day, they came back. Story had got out all over town, and there was a big crowd in case it happened again, but it didn't. Which must have disappointed the crowd, eh?
The policeman smiled grimly, and Yaz nodded, knowing how people like to make a spectacle of the strange and potentially dangerous.
Well, the next day, the actors comes back for their performance, but when the audience got here, the whole place was shut up. Someone went and found the man in charge, Mr. Hawke, Mr. Revels Hawke. We live not far from here. Anyways, they went and knocked him up, and he told them the theatre was haunted and the company wasn't going back there for nothing. And that's how it stayed. So every few years, someone had fancy a chance at opening it, but then the ghosts came back and they'd shut it up again.
The policeman stood back and nodded with satisfaction.
So, I don't reckon it'll ever open again.
He was about to add to this remark when a window banged open on a house nearby and a woman put her head and shoulders out of it. The fog had lifted a little and Yaz and the doctor could just see her silhouetted in the glow from the lantern.
Augustus Drumlin! I know it's you down there. I heard you spreading your gossip again. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're an officer of the law. Haunting and ghost stuff and nonsense. This is a respectable neighbourhood, and I will thank you to remember that.
With that final verbal fusillade, she slammed the window shut again. Constable Drumlin shuffled his feet.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Don't let us hold you up. You get on with your beat.
Again, not really understanding the words, but reading the sentiment behind them, Constable Drumlin touched his hand to his forehead and said,
Yeah, I'll be on my way then, ladies.
The two travellers watched as he disappeared once more into the fog.
Ghosts?
Asked Yaz.
I don't think so.
No, I didn't think you did. So, what do you think it is? Or was?
I'm not sure, but it isn't ghosts. Look at this.
She held up the sonic and Yaz peered at it through the fog and darkness.
What am I looking at?
She asked, finally.
Electrical activity. Lots of it. Far too much for this time and place. Something's going on in there, and we need to find out what it is and who's behind it.
Well, we can't get in here.
Yaz said, looking at the front door and the weight of the chain that held it closed.
There'll be a way in somewhere. Stage door, coal hall or something. Come on, round the side here.
She strode off and Yaz followed, hoping sincerely that they wouldn't end up climbing in through the coal hole. She caught up with the doctor by a door in the side wall. It wasn't chained shut, but a plank had been nailed across it and into the frame.
See? Stage door. Now we just need a crowbar or something,
said the doctor, breathless from her haste.
I don't want to sound discouraging, but where are we going to find one of those?
Oh, there'll be something. Look, over there.
She pointed to where a heap of rubble could just be seen, lurking under the fog as if lying in wait to injure a careless passerby. Yaz rolled her eyes, but joined her friend in searching for something that would help them open the door. For a few minutes they searched in silence, then the doctor gave a triumphant shout.
This'll do,
she said, waving what looked to Yaz like part of a cast iron fence, a narrow metal bar covered in chipped black paint. The doctor put one end of the bar under the edge of the plank and pressed down on it, and Yaz joined her. They pushed as hard as they could, but it seemed that the nails were firmly stuck. Then, suddenly, there was a rending crash, and the plank sprang loose, and doctor and companion found themselves in a heap on the floor. Yaz struggled to her feet and held out her hand to the doctor.
Thanks. You okay?
The doctor said, brushing off her jacket.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Said Yaz as she leaned against the wall to get her breath back.
What do we do now?
We go inside, we find out what's happening, we see if anyone needs help, and we help them.
Same as usual then?
Yep, same as usual. Ready?
Yeah.
The doctor pulled the door open and switched on the light on the sonic, and she and Yaz went inside. If the streets outside the theatre were dark, the inside of the building was even darker. The doctor and Yaz paused inside the door, and the doctor held up the sonic. As the light moved, a hallway revealed itself. Dust covered every surface, just as the fog covered the city. Shaded candlesticks were mounted on the walls, wreathed in cobwebs. The unmistakable smell of an abandoned building met Yaz's nose, and she coughed again.
Oh, nobody's been here in a while,
she said.
No, nobody human anyway.
Despite herself, Yaz shivered. The doctor stepped forward, holding the sonic in front of her. A sudden sound startled them both, and they jumped back as a mouse scuttled past. The doctor laughed with relief.
Oh, getting jumpy. Let's see what's round the corner here.
They moved forwards, slowly, then stopped. The doctor peered round the corner, then said,
Yaz, look!
Yaz looked and gasped. Coming down the corridor towards them was a figure. It looked like a man. At least it was man-shaped. It was wearing a long robe decorated with stars and a tall hat with a wide brim. The forked beard on its chin was so long that it reached the broad sash around its waist. It made no sound as it moved. It seemed to Yaz to be floating rather than walking, and it glowed as if it was lit from within. As it advanced, Yaz realised that she could see the wall behind it, through it. As it passed in front of a lamp, the lamp appeared through it, refracted as if seen through water. There was also, Yaz realised, something familiar about the figure.
Holograms?
She asked in a whisper.
Yes, he's a hologram. But why? And how did he get here?
She was about to move towards the hologram, but stopped as a voice came from the other direction.
Greville, my dear?
It was the voice of a woman. The hologram turned, and Yaz and the Doctor saw another figure. She seemed younger than the man, and she was wearing simple white dress with a wreath of flowers around the neck. The man stopped, smiled, and held out his hands.
Well met by moonlight, my little Miranda.
The woman laughed as she took his hands.
One day you will muddle yourself on the stage and banish Titania to France or have Cordelia enamoured of an ass.
The man laughed too.
Not I, my dear. Not while I have you to keep me on the straight path. But come, we must prepare. Mr. Havering tells me that the house is almost full tonight. We must give them our best.
We will. We always give our best. And yet...
Her expression grew troubled and she turned away from him.
Eleanor, what is it? What troubles you?
It is... I do not know. A feeling, a foreboding. I'm afraid.
She clung to his arm and looked at him, and Yaz could see tears in her eyes. The man, Greville, put his arm around her shoulders.
My dear, you are weary, I fear. Come now, sit a while in your room and it will pass.
He led her away, leaving the Doctor and Yaz looking at each other.
We need to find out what's happening here.
The Doctor said, with a determined expression on her face that Yaz recognised. The distress of the woman had moved her, even if she knew that she was watching an artificial projection. She said nothing, but nodded and followed her friend into the corridor. The Doctor looked at the sonic and said,
This way. The electronic activity signal is getting stronger.
She hastened her steps in the direction that the holograms had taken, then stopped again outside a door and held up her hand. Yaz stopped and listened. Someone inside the room was crying. A dreary, tired, heartbroken sound. Yaz went past the Doctor and into the room. The woman, or rather, the hologram of a woman they had seen in the corridor, was sitting in a chair in front of a dressing table. Her arms were on the tabletop and her head was resting on them. Yaz saw her shoulders shake with sobbing. Hologram or not, Yaz wanted to put her arm around her and comfort her, but she knew she couldn't, so instead she crouched down beside her and said,
Eleanor, what's wrong?
The woman gave a start and sat up.
Who are you? How came you here?
Yaz ignored the second question and said gently,
I'm Yaz. This is my friend the Doctor. We knew you were upset and we wanted to help you. Talk to me, please.
Eleanor seemed to become calmer. She took a deep breath in and dabbed at the corner of her eyes with the bedraggled handkerchief she had been holding in her hand.
I know you not, and yet your faces have kindness in them. Very well, but there is little time. The play begins soon.
That's okay. I mean, it does not matter. We can listen quickly, can't we, Doctor?
We can. What troubles you, Eleanor?
Eleanor looked from the Doctor to Yaz and screwed her handkerchief together in her hands. A crashing sound came from close by, followed by the sound of raised voices.
They've begun. I must be brief. Very well. I have of late become afraid that I've lost my memory. I cannot remember anything but that which happened this night. I saw my husband. I greeted him and he joked with me, and he came with me to this room. Then he left me to go on the stage. All before it is a blank. I know he's my husband. I feel my love for him strongly, but I do not know how I know this. I know that I'm Eleanor Hawke, about to perform the part of Miranda. The lines are written in my mind, but I do not know how I learned them. And there is more. I feel that we have been here before. Not yesternight nor before that, but here on this night, over and again. I see my husband, I greet him, the play begins, we act, we rest between the acts, we near the end, then before we reach it, of a sudden, I'm here again, greeting my husband. I can see it in my mind, the whole before me. We are trapped, and there is no course for us but to repeat ourselves over and again, 100 times, 1,000 times, an infinity of times.
She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. At that moment, a voice outside the door called, "Miranda, your first call. Miranda." The hologram of Eleanor Hawke sat up straight in her chair.
I must away, to the stage. There I will stand and watch until my time is come, then enter and perform my past. I must. I have no choice. See? The time is come. If you can, please help us. If we could but reach the end. But then I fear we would only begin again. Please.
She turned away and moved through the door and out of the sight of the Doctor and Yaz. Yaz got to her feet and looked at the Doctor.
She doesn't know that she's a hologram, does she? She thinks she's alive.
Yeah, she thinks she's Eleanor Hawke, the living human.
How?
I'm not sure. She said she doesn't remember anything except what we just saw her do, and the play, right?
Yes.
So that must be the length of the programming. The holograms are programmed and projected from a short time before the play for the length of the performance.
Yes, but she said that the play didn't finish.
Yeah, there must be a glitch. Something is making the projection stop and restart over and over again.
How long has it been running? If she is a hologram of Eleanor Hawke was alive 200 years ago from now. Didn't Constable, what's his name, Drumlin say that Greville Hawke ran the theatre in 1685?
Yes,
said the Doctor again. She seemed lost in thought, then said,
that's it!
What's it?
That's what happened, the bright lights, when the actors vanished. They were teleported. They must have been. They were teleported off the stage, replicated as holograms, and then put back again. Then the holograms were sent back and programmed to repeat the play over and over again. They were the ghosts. Every night they repeated the play, and nobody else could stay here because of the hologram.
Yes, but who did it and why? And how do we stop it? We must stop it, mustn't we?
Yes, we must. We owe it to Eleanor. She may have begun as a hologram, but she has become a person, and she is suffering. We need to help her. Let's go!
With the Sonic to light their way, the TARDIS team followed the voices and sounds from the stage and found themselves in the wings, looking out over the auditorium. As with the rest of the building, the rows of empty seats were covered in dust and cobwebs. The hologram actors moved around and through Yaz and the Doctor, waiting for their entrances, delivering their lines, oblivious to the two interlopers in their midst. The glow from the holograms lit the auditorium in a low, sinister light, and Yaz felt herself shiver as she looked at it. The Doctor, however, was looking at something else.
That's it,
she said, pointing upwards.
There, on the ceiling, 3 rows back.
Yaz squinted and followed her friend's direction. She could see a round shape fastened to the ceiling. It looked a bit like an old-fashioned security camera that she had seen in a television programme.
That's the projector!
How are we going to get to it? We'll need a ladder.
We might not have to. There should be a control panel somewhere.
Yaz had another thought.
Someone's watching, aren't they? They wouldn't set all this up, make the holograms and get them to do the play over and over if it weren't going to watch it. There must be a camera too. Someone's watching, aren't they? They wouldn't set all this up, make the holograms and get them to do the play over and over if they weren't going to watch it.
Spot on. It's probably next to the projector. Bird's eye view.
She ran to the front of the stage and jumped off, followed more cautiously by Yaz. They walked towards the back of the auditorium, keeping to the wall on the right-hand side until the Doctor gave a cry of,
Yes! Found it!
she said, waving the sonic in triumph and stopping so suddenly that Yaz bumped into her.
That's it. It looks like a sideboard.
How many sideboards do you get in theatres? None. We're looking for something that shouldn't be here, and this definitely shouldn't. So this must be it?
Yaz wasn't entirely sure of the Doctor's reasoning, but she didn't argue. Instead, she joined her in crouching down next to the object. It did indeed look like a sideboard, a low cupboard made of dark wood, heavily varnished, its surface pitted from long usage. The Doctor opened one of the doors and said,
Yes, here we are.
under her breath, then sat back so Yaz could see inside. The cupboard was lined with metal and filled with circuitry, wires and tiny flashing lights.
What's it running off?
Must be a self-charging battery, I reckon, or else one with a heck of a long life.
She began to trace the patterns of wires and circuits. Yaz waited, not wanting to interrupt her. Instead, she turned her attention to the play. It was by Shakespeare, she thought, and tried to remember which play had a character in it called Miranda. She had just remembered that it was The Tempest when the Doctor gave a muted cry of triumph from behind the door.
What have you found?
The problem.
The Doctor said, holding out her hand. In it was a tiny, dried-up grey shape, the long dead body of a mouse.
This little chap ate some of the wiring. Poor little fella. What a way to go.
She put the tiny corpse down on the floor.
That caused a short circuit, and that caused the projections to glitch and loop back on themselves.
Why didn't they notice whoever it was made it? You'd think they'd come and fix it.
Perhaps they couldn't be bothered.
The Doctor replied. Then, when she saw Yaz's expression,
Think about it. You get a recording, a DVD, video, wax cylinder, whatever. You watch it a few times because you really like it. Then, after a while, it goes a bit wrong, starts skipping or something. You give it a few more times, but in the end, you get fed up with it and chuck it in a drawer. You don't throw it away because it meant something to you when you got it, but you don't bother about it again.
she turned back to the cupboard and flashes of light and a small thread of smoke came out over the door.
What are you doing?
I'm mending the circuit. Or trying to. If I can just reroute this bit.
Yaz glanced towards the stage. As she watched, she saw the figures of the actors begin to flicker and waver. She nudged the Doctor.
It's starting to glitch.
Nearly there!
Said the voice from the cupboard. Then the Doctor emerged and sat back on her heels.
Done! That's bypassed the dodgy bit. They should make it to the end of the play now and not bounce back.
And then what?
The Doctor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back to the cupboard and began to rummage inside.
Doctor, what will happen then?
The Doctor turned to face Yaz and held up a circuit board.
Then it will stop. I've drained the battery and dismantled the charging mechanism. There's enough charge for them to get to the end of the play. Then that's it. If anyone tries to reconnect it, it'll short circuit completely. It's time for the performance to finish.
She put her hand on Yaz's shoulder.
Let's watch. I haven't seen this one for a long time.
She helped Yaz up and they went back down to the auditorium and chose seats close to the stage. The play progressed as smoothly as the original performance would have. The actors played their parts and the threads of the plot were drawn together. Finally, the hologram of Greville Hawke approached the front of the stage and gave Prospero's final speech, his appeal to the audience.
Now my charms are all overthrown, and what strength I have is mine own, which is most faint. Now 'tis true I must here be confined by you, all sent to Naples. Let me not, since I have my dukedom got, and pardon the deceiver, dwell in this bare island by your spell, but release me from my bands with the help of your good hands. Gentle breath of yours my sails must fill, or else my project fails, which was to please. Now I want spirits to enforce, art to enchant, and my ending is despair, unless I be relieved by prayer, which pierces so that it assaults mercy itself and frees all faults, as you from crimes would pardon be. Let your indulgence set me free.
As he spoke the final word, The hologram began to flicker. The cast came forward and joined hands, and the holograms warped and faded as they bowed. Yaz and the Doctor applauded, unheard by the cast, save for Eleanor. She looked towards them and smiled, and her lips formed the words,
I thank you.
Then, as the battery died, the holograms twitched and warped and faded away, and there was silence in the auditorium. Yaz and the Doctor sat still, each buried in their thoughts. Then the Doctor put her hand on Yaz's arm.
Time to go.
Yes.
Said Yaz, but she didn't get up. Instead, she said,
What happened to Eleanor? How did she get to thinking that she was a person? To thinking at all?
She couldn't quite express what she felt, but the Doctor understood.
I think it must have been the repetition. Either that or some of the original Eleanor's personality got imprinted onto the hologram. But perhaps doing the same thing over and over, running the same programme, inhabiting the same person for 200 years. Perhaps that's what gave us some form of sentience. I just don't know.
She squeezed Yaz's arm gently, and Yaz nodded and stood up. Where to? Asked the Doctor as they left the theatre.
Back to the TARDIS. And somewhere we can go outside without coughing.
Yaz suggested, trying to smile.
You're on,
said the Doctor, and inside the theatre, amid the cobwebs and the dust, the only sound was the scurrying of mice in the dark. Our Revels Now Are Ended was a Who Corner to Corner podcast production. Written by Lucy McCaul, starring Orianna Rose as the Doctor, Emily Beach as Yaz, Liz Drury as Eleanor Hawke, Paul Laville as Greville Hawke, Freya Laville as the Landlady, Paul Laville as Constable Drumlin. Narrated by Jeff Cockwell. Audio production by Jeff Cockwell. Find us online at whoc2c.buzzsprout.com. New podcast episodes release every Sunday.